This is a 5-minute university about the book The Institutional Revolution, which is an innocent looking volume, maybe even kind of boring looking, by Douglas Allen, who teaches at UCLA. Uh, and it's a fascinating book. I learned a ton of stuff about it. It focuses on the pre modern British aristocracy and only on them. So, somewhere in the period 1550 to about 1850, when modernism really steps in and takes over, maybe even a little before 1850. And it starts off by saying, look, there were all these really weird behaviors that are very hard to explain. Uh, the aristocracy, the pre modern British aristocracy, had dueling. They had expensive estates out in the middle of no place, and they hosted lavish parties for each other. They had hunting with the hounds. They inherited positions, but they didn't teach their children anything useful. There was primogeniture, so the eldest child sort of got most of the spoils, but they would be sent on the grand tour of Europe. They would learn Latin and Greek. They would not learn accounting, efficiency of any kind, management of any kind. Those sort of came, and it wasn't even that they weren't invented. We had guilds that were doing things that were pretty efficient and pretty smart. Allen invents this notion of hostage capital, and what he says is the pre-modern British aristocracy, all the institutions around it, were designed at a time when trust at a distance was really, really hard, when nature could destroy pretty much anything, and it would be very hard to tell whether the bad result of the ship coming into port with all of its cargo ruined was a result of actual bad weather that happened on the voyage or total incompetence on the part of the captain and crew. So, in order to make sure that people whose interests were not perfectly aligned with the crown behaved in a way that worked for the crown, you had to create methods that created trust at a distance, and hostage capital was that method. And hostage capital means that if you were in the British aristocracy, you were all in. Your title would pass down. If you were cut out of that society, you kind of had nothing at the end. You donated your daughters to the crown, to the court. You were completely invested in this lifestyle, and short of being beheaded because you had done some act of treason, if you were cut out of court, came out of favor, you had nothing left to really lean on, nothing left to rely on, except a whole bunch of debts and assets that got you no place. In this way, he could trust then that a naval captain on the other hemisphere, across the ocean, across the world from Britain, was actually acting in the benefit of the crown, not in self-interest. So there's all these really interesting things that he dives into about the difference between the British Army and the British Navy, for example. In the Navy, positions were inherited. And there's a whole bunch of really interesting and shocking history about how young boys were when they were put on board ships, if they were officer track kids, a bunch of stuff. But in the army, because you could have observers on the hill who would tell you who was fighting and who was not and what the outcomes were, most of the officer ranks were purchasable. There were markets. You could buy and sell and trade positions in the British Army up to a certain point. And then if you kind of got old enough, everybody became a general. If you lived long enough and stayed in long enough, that was almost like an honorary position, not necessarily a position of skill. So the notion of meritocracy is much later. In many of these places, there's either markets with self-interest where you buy your position or inherited position. And all of this works well enough to give us rule Britannia for the better part of a couple centuries. It's an incredible, crazy sounding mix of things that people did and took completely for granted, like dueling. You could get shot in dueling, and it was not illegal, but kind of socially immoral to decline a duel and to aim elsewhere. Like to shoot high was punishable, was as bad as declining a duel. This is a matter of honor. And it was a way of raising the risks of participating in the aristocracy and making sure that everybody was all in. Once you got to a certain rank, to a certain seniority, you were kind of exempted from duels. The most senior people usually didn't have to duel. And dueling was very hard to kill off later on because it was so entrenched as a part of what was happening. So all of these things seem really weird and archaic from our modern lens today. I like this book a lot because it shows how such a weird rig of behaviors and institutions could work very functionally for a long time, so that they look comical today. But I'm wondering what those institutions are today and tomorrow that will make the world work better and yet may seem a little crazy or counterintuitive or not look normal to our modern eyes. That's another 5-minute university. Please come back. There's more. Thanks for watching.